I spent 3 months traveling Europe by train by myself. Here's everything that I learned and what I wish I knew going into the process. There are a ton of benefits to traveling by yourself. One of which is you get to make up your itinerary all on your own. You get to decide what you do, where you go, what you eat, where you sleep. It's really nice, and that kind of freedom is really empowering. Starting out on my trip, I remember I wanted to be in a city initially, which was awesome and a lot of fun, so I started in Berlin. But then once I experienced that and I was ready for some countryside, I had the ability just to choose where I wanted to go, jump on a train, and so I headed off to Austria, where I got to just spend some time in the mountains. Another benefit is that you're gonna learn a ton about yourself. So if you're traveling Europe by train or by bus, you're gonna have hours just sitting, having time just to contemplate life and what you want for the future. And so I think that's one of the great things about traveling by yourself. It encourages a lot of self-reflection that you won't get necessarily when you're traveling with a larger group. The last benefit I'll mention right now is that it really forces you out of your comfort zone. So me, I am a total introvert and I love routine. Going to Europe for me was really putting myself out there, pulling away all semblance of routine, forcing me into situations where I had to make new relationships with people and talk to people. So those are the benefits of traveling by yourself. So let's go ahead and just get into a few of these tips I have. So one of my first tips is just pack lightly. You don't want to have multiple bags that you're having to keep track of when you're by yourself. When I traveled, I had just one backpack and then like a small messenger bag. That was really easy for me to manage, and it allowed me just the freedom just to take my belongings with me if I needed to. If there wasn't a good locker or something at the hostel, I could easily just keep all my belongings with me and still enjoy what I was going out and doing. Another benefit of traveling light is that it makes you look less like a tourist. So in busy tourist areas, you're gonna stick out like a sore thumb if you have, your giant neon backpack that looks like you just took everything from your closet and threw it in there. I recommend, packing as light as you can, as light as is reasonable for you, so that you don't have to worry about standing out too much in those touristy places where people might want to take advantage of you. One of my best finds when I was planning my trip to Europe is a company called PacSafe, who makes these backpacks. Their backpacks are essentially meant to be anti-theft, and I know theft isn't that big of a deal in Europe. A lot of times, I wasn't concerned about my belongings most of the time, but they designed their backpacks to have wire mesh in the front of them so that people can't just cut them open and take your stuff out. A lot of them have a way for one of the straps to wrap around something and you can lock it to it. So that's one way just to secure your pack if you're maybe sleeping on a train. So if you want to check out those backpacks, I'll put a link down in the description below where you can go see those yourself. So the most intimidating day by far for me on my whole trip by myself was the first day where I was completely alone. So I started my trip by flying into Sweden, where my sister-in-law's family lives. And so I was able to spend a week with them there and almost kind of just acclimate to just being in Europe. And then from there, they took me to a train station where I was off and I was on my own. The first place I was headed to was Berlin. And so I got off the train. It was probably like 6 in the morning because I had taken an overnight train. And suddenly I was in this new city completely by myself. Just getting oriented on that first day, I remember it took me maybe a few hours before it really started to sink in and I started to feel a bit more comfortable. I think some of the things I could have done just to better prepare for that would be to maybe book my first hostel in advance, know exactly where I was going to be going from the train station that I arrived at, maybe having a few just activities planned for that first day. Something else you'll want to be aware of when traveling by yourself is that it is really important that you connect with good people while you're traveling. If you're traveling solo and you're not intentionally placing yourself in situations where you're gonna connect with other people, then it's super easy to get really lonely. You're in a new environment, doing new things, and you don't know anyone. And so just the value of meeting someone, connecting with them, and getting just to spend time with them and have a conversation suddenly becomes so much more valuable. So when you're planning your trip, as you're making your plans, take that into consideration when you're thinking about the places that you stay and your method of transportation. There are a few things you can do just to place yourself in the paths of more people who you're likely to connect with. Some of my favorite ways to connect with people were just to do like free walking tours in the cities that I would visit. There would usually be lots of other young people on those that you could connect with. I usually made a few friends that I would end up spending the entire day with. You can also think carefully about where you're going to be staying. So a lot of hostels draw in a younger crowd where it's going to be super easy for you to meet people to hang out with. One of the biggest mistakes you can make if you're trying to connect with people is booking all your accommodation at like budget hotels where the crowds are usually older people or small families, because you're far less likely to make those types of connections that you would than if you had just booked at like a hostel. If you're really concerned about traveling Europe by yourself and not making those connections, something you might look into is Busabout. So they're a company that operates in Europe that has kind of like a hop on, hop off bus system that just travels all over Europe. I believe they hit like 38 different cities on their route. But anyway, a lot of young people do those. So it has this fun atmosphere where you can connect with other people while you're traveling. And then once you get to your destination, you may or may not already have a few friends that you can go off and do something with. So the last thing I'll say about traveling Europe by yourself is that, you know, it's really cool to see something breathtaking and incredible by yourself, but it's so much better just to experience that with another person. You know, even if it's a stranger that you met a couple hours ago, just having someone just to talk about the experience with adds so much to it that we kind of take for granted maybe when we're not traveling and we're surrounded by friends and loved ones. So my next tip has to do with your finances while you're traveling. So when I was planning my trip, I planned on doing it really low budget right from the beginning. And I stuck really well to that budget and ended up not spending as much as I thought I would. One regret I did have after getting back to the States is that I didn't splurge when I needed to splurge all the time. For a lot of people, traveling to Europe may be a once-in-a-lifetime experience. I believe that when you're there, you should do your best to make the most out of the experience. If there's something interesting or cool that you're never gonna be near enough to do again, then I think it's best just to go ahead and spend a little extra money to do it. So I remember I was like in Rome and I was interested in going into the Colosseum, but the line was long and there was a fee to get in. And so I ended up just deciding to skip it altogether. When looking back, I think it would have been cool just to spend a little extra money, take a little extra time to do that, because I don't know when I'm gonna be back in Rome again to see it. Something else that surprised me about traveling by myself was how quickly time flies and how easy it is to lose track of the days. You know, when you're not worrying about a 9-to-5 job and all of your normal obligations that you may have in day-to-day life, the days of the week really become less and less important. I found myself a lot of days just not even realizing what day of the week it was. And I don't know if this is necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, but one thing I would say is be really intentional just about getting the most that you can out of each and every day. It can be easy to become complacent, you know, if you have 2-3 months of travel, it can feel like you have all the time in the world. The reality is that time will come to an end pretty quickly. So my biggest regret when traveling was how little I actually documented my trip. I believe when I went on my trip, it was like recently after watching that Secret Life of Walter Mitty movie, where there's that scene where the guy's taking the picture of the snow leopard and he's got his camera all set up, he has the snow leopard in focus, but then he doesn't take the picture because I believe the line is like, he just wanted the moment for himself, just to cherish for himself, which I think that principle does carry over into travel. You shouldn't constantly be looking through a camera lens the entire time you're traveling, but I use that ideology as a justification for just documenting little to nothing, which I regret so much now looking back. So if I had to go back and tell myself to do something differently, I would tell myself to get like a decent little camera and just bring it out with me as I was seeing all these different things. I traveled like 12 different countries and I probably only had like 80 pictures when all was said and done. And you don't necessarily even have to go out and buy an incredible camera before your trip. You can just use your smartphone, because the cameras in a lot of them these days are pretty incredible. But just be intentional every single day. Just, you know, take a short little video, take lots of pictures, write down your thoughts in a journal and what you did for the day. Because looking back on your trip, those memories that you captured will be one of the most valuable things that you take away from it. So when you start out your trip, there'll be this time when you feel a little lonely and you're gonna try and find people as quickly as possible and want to surround yourself with people. But then a little later on, depending on the length of your trip, you may reach a point where you really start to want some privacy, especially if you're staying in like hostel dorm rooms where there's constantly other people coming in and out, and the showers are like a shared area as well. I recommend, just having a little extra money in your budget for if you do start to feel that way, just to go get a small private room. Sometimes hostels will even have private rooms that you can get. If not, there are usually some budget hotels around, or you could look at like an Airbnb. Take care of yourself when you're traveling. If you're a little frustrated by the lack of privacy, then just spend extra money, get a private room for a night, and then get back to the normal routine the next day with some renewed energy. Something else I learned from traveling by myself is that travel does change you, but maybe not as much as you think it will. So, in society, a lot of times travel is romanticized as this journey of self-discovery. It's a way to become your true self and learn everything about yourself and just become more confident and outgoing. And I think what I learned is that it doesn't matter where you are, you're still going to be inherently yourself. Even if you're in a different exciting country or environment, you're still going to deal with a lot of the same things that you deal with in normal everyday life. And so it's less about where you are than what you choose to do and who you choose to be in the moment. And coming back from my trip, I think what I learned is that life is as exciting and interesting as you decide to make it. You can live somewhere exciting or interesting your whole life, but if you never decide just to go outside and explore what's around you, then you might have the idea that you live in a boring place, when in reality, it really comes down to who you are and what you decide to do with the environment that you're in. So those are my main takeaways for traveling solo. Here are just a few more tips that'll be helpful for you if you're planning on doing a trip like this in the future. It's really important that you exude confidence when you're traveling by yourself. If you're in a bad part of town and someone sees you by yourself and you're burying your face in your phone or a map and you look confused and frustrated, then you're pinpointing yourself as a target for people that might take advantage of you. Do your best just to exude confidence wherever you're going so that you don't paint yourself as a target. Another tip that you should consider is just avoid arriving in cities later at night. So a lot of times you might be tempted just to take a train that puts you in a new city at 10 or 11 p.m. But I don't recommend this, just because going into a new city, it's not likely that you'll be familiar with the areas that you might want to stay out of. Just arriving during daylight hours, you can just ensure that you're safe, that you're able to get to your hostel where you can get more information, get a map, maybe learn a little bit more about the area that you're at and where you should and shouldn't be venturing out on your own. Another tip concerning safety would just be let someone know where you are. When you're traveling solo, it can be easy to get wrapped up in just the freedom of just going wherever you want, whenever you want, and just forgetting to tell anyone back home where you're at or what you're doing. But, in the event that something bad did happen, it would be really important for people to have a starting point to know where you last were and where they could start looking for you. For me, it was my mom. I just stayed in touch with her during my trip. I would just send her a text every now and then and let her know where I was at. Whoever that is in your life, maybe it's a friend or a family member, just have someone that you keep correspondence with, that you let know your plans somewhat and where you are if you need to be found or if something goes wrong. So I plan on doing a whole video just about, packing for Europe. But one thing I'll mention quickly is I recommend bringing extra chargers for your devices. I know I had my iPhone with me when I was in Europe, as well as like an iPad. Those were really important for me just as I made plans. I recommend bringing extra chargers for those. So thankfully, because I did have two Apple devices, I had two chargers with me, but I did end up losing one of those chargers, just like leaving it behind somewhere. But thankfully I did have the extra and I was able to keep charging my devices throughout the rest of my trip. Another tip as it concerns packing would be only bring clothes that you love and that you know that you'll wear. So if your goal is to pack lightly, you really don't want to have anything in your backpack that you're not going to wear and that you're not going to use. So just think of those essential items as you're packing, the stuff that you wear the most at home, because that's just the stuff that you're most likely to end up wearing on your trip. Just make sure you bring those items and try to bring less of the stuff that you don't normally use in day-to-day life. Another tip would be just to plan out your trip at least somewhat in advance, so that you know what those must-do, must-see destinations are for you. It's gonna be different for everyone, but just having an idea of those things that you really wanna do and really wanna see can help you to structure your time for your trip and ensure that you're able to hit everything that you wanna hit before it's time for you to go back home. If you do have a travel option that allows you more freedom, then you might do a lot more of this on the go and research the next city you wanna go to the day before that you're traveling there. But I kinda wish that before my trip, I had just taken more time to really get to know everywhere in Europe that I would have liked to have seen. So if you're ready to start planning your trip, one thing I would encourage you to do is to check out the train passes that are available for traveling Europe. I just made a whole video where I talk about one of the most popular pass companies, which is Eurail, and I'll put that link in the description where you can go check that out. If you have any questions about traveling by yourself, whether in Europe or other places, I'd love to help you out. You can just put your question in the comments. But thank you guys so much for watching, and see you next time.